to develop even more questions, right, by introducing some more complexity to the spectrum that we've gone over. So, refresh my memory, justify my existence in the in the universe, right? And let's say that we've got this spectrum between extreme upshot and extreme downshot with a theoretically perfectly stable perspective in the middle. What does a theoretically perfectly stable perspective look like? Where would the horizon line be in that frame?
In the exact middle.
Okay, and where is the object in relationship to it?
In front of it.
Center of the eye line.
Okay, yeah, so equal amount above, equal amount below. Now, let's say we want to shift that stable perspective slightly towards an upshot, slightly towards a downshot. What's the most subtle change that we can make to that picture?
Moving the object.
Moving the object. So we keep the horizon line stable, and if we want to move towards a downshot, we move the horizon, or we move the object up or down.
Down.
Down. Right. So more object below, more object above. What's the next thing that we can do to make it even more extreme?
Put it underneath or above the horizon line.
Okay, so we've already done that, so that's an option right here. But what can we move now if we're not moving the object?
You could move the horizon line like
Move the
lower
horizon.
or
Yep. So if we're moving towards a downshot, do we move the horizon line up or down?
up.
Perfect. So horizon line's up here, more object below, horizon line's down here, more object above. Right. So for example, this is a really simple way of making something feel much more dominant inside of a scene. Right. So if we watch that matrix clip that I sent you yesterday, when they first cut to, Trinity asking us like whether or not she's got you got a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter. That's what they do with the helicopter. They drop the horizon line, right? So that helicopter, when you're looking at it, most of it's up here, right? And as a result, feels much more impressive than if you were to look at that same helicopter, right? Like this. Okay? So it's a very easy way of taking a very simple perspective, right? And making it do the things that you want it to do emotionally, right? So with that in mind, how do we exaggerate this even further?
You
I'm dealing
remove, remove the horizon line.
Yep. But where do I move it? If I move it below the horizon line here, what's that called?
High crop?
Yep. And if I move it below above the horizon line, or sorry,
Low crop.
Low crop. So there's my low crop, there's my high crop. All of this stuff is 1 point and 2 point. That's it. Right. And what's this called? Your extreme upshot, and what's this called? Your extreme downshot.
Bird's eye, worm's eye.
Okay, so here's your worm's eye, here's your bird's eye. These, as you now know, are both just 1 point. So what that means, right, is that just by mastering essentially one type of perspective, 1 point and 2 point, and its multiple variations, you have, what do you got? 9 different options. 9 different options of potential POVs available to you to best and most efficiently describe the idea that's kicking around inside your head. So if perspective isn't particularly your jam, right, isn't really making sense to you, right, or you don't find it particularly enjoyable, all of those are totally understandable and valid responses to perspective. Right? It is a useful tool. Some would say, this guy included, an essential tool, but you don't need fancy perspective, right, in order to do stuff. If you come away with anything from this class, master this shit right here. It's simple stuff that gives you a wide array of options in order to express your ideas more effectively. And that thumbnailing process of going through varying options that we did last term or last class, that becomes kind of a critical tool as a way of exploring those different options inside this range. Okay, so that's just my none too subtle advice in terms of how maybe to approach this course, right? But also, future projects, classes, courses in general as you're moving forward. Okay, now what we're going to do today is essentially a blend of your bird's eye view and your worm's eye view and your high crop and your low crop. And we're essentially going to fill in this gap with a 3-point upshot and a 3-point downshot. Right? These are really useful. They're slightly more complex, although not really. Maybe it takes like just a little bit to kind of wrap your head around it. Right? But the wrapping of the head, right, is easily explainable via its relationship to, say, a worm's eye and a bird's eye view, as well as a high crop and a low crop, because it's got similar characteristics to both of those things. Now, essentially what you're doing with your 3-point up and 3-point down shot is that if you've got that person standing there with a camera looking straight ahead, again, you've got this option, this option, this option, this option, this option. Don't know what I just did there. This option and this option. All of that stuff is the 1-point and 2-point stuff. So you're dealing with stuff that's perfectly parallel to the horizon line or perfectly perpendicular to the ground plane in one way or another. What we're doing today is taking that camera and physically tilting it into a 3-point up, or physically tilting it into a 3-point down. And there's a wide array of options in between perfectly vertical and perfectly parallel, which means that you can have a 3-point upshot that's really, really subtle in terms of its tilt. Same thing with a downshot in terms of its tilt, or really extreme in terms of its tilt, to the point where a 3-point up or down shot, if it's really subtle, will be almost indistinguishable from a high crop and a low crop. Right? So those things are easily interchangeable with each other. And likewise, your 3-point down shot and 3-point up shot are almost indistinguishable from a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view, right? And are almost interchangeable with each other. Okay, so these are really nice because of the flexibility, but they're also easily exchangeable for stuff that we've already done. Basically, at the end of today, that entire ghost in the shell clip that we looked at, that's all this is, right? Is one version of these kinds of perspective or another for 8 minutes of screen time, done really, really well. That matrix example that I asked you guys to watch is all of this, right? Just in live action as opposed to drawn version, right? With the exception of one shot in it that would require curved perspective. But it's very, very particular in terms of why you might want to use it. This is another way of saying is like, you don't need fancy perspective. This shit does most of your legwork, 99% of the stuff that you're ever going to have to storyboard or visualize. Right now, there is a bit of a misnomer about what 3-point is, right? In the sense that, people tend to think about it as being an entirely different kind of perspective because it's got an entirely different kind of name. There are 2 separate things that you need to remember about 3-point. One, right, is that the horizon line still exists, right, but it's not in the frame. Right, so that's its similarity to a high crop and a low crop. Right, some of you got those or have already maybe looked at the comments that you received, right, from your last assignment. This is the easiest way to screw up a high crop or a low crop, is that you insert the horizon line inside the frame. And when you insert the horizon line inside the frame, what it allows your audience to do is to identify where they are inside the picture. And because this isn't tilting the camera at all, what that essentially allows your audience to do is to know that there's a certain amount below and a certain amount above them. They know where they are inside the frame. All your audience knows in a high crop and a low crop is that they're somewhere above or somewhere below the frame. Right? So we're exaggerating the effect of looking up or looking down at something by just showing them stuff that's up here or down here, right? Even though they're technically still looking straight ahead at a point below or above the frame. Okay, so just like with a high crop and a low crop, you cannot have the horizon line in frame for a 3-point, right? And just like with the high crop and a low crop, just like with a high crop or low crop, the perspective will still work, but you'll create an entirely different kind of effect, okay, which will make more sense as we go forward. So this cannot happen. So with a 3-point upshot, your horizon line still exists, but it's below the frame. With a 3-point downshot, your horizon line still exists, but it's above the frame. Okay, so that's essential. Second characteristic, right, is that you now have a vanishing point for all vertical lines. Right, so that's its similarity to a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view. Right, but dissimilar to a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view, that vanishing point is now in a particular spot in relationship to your horizon line. So your horizon line, it still exists. And your vanishing points for your 2-point are still at the end of that horizon line. And your 1-point is still directly in between those 2 points. Okay, so all of these vanishing points here in that horizon line, these all control lateral recession. Right, so stuff that's basically on the ground or parallel to the ground, right, and receding off into the distance towards that point on the horizon. Right? So none of this changes. So what that means is that all of your lateral lines will still be going. Like this, like they have been since the beginning of the class for a 2-point, and same thing for a 1-point. So that means if you were to draw the footprint of a 2-point object on the ground, the footprint of that 2-point object would look like that, same as usual. If you were to draw the footprint of a 1-point object, that footprint would still look exactly the same. I mean, top and bottom, or front and back edges, right, would be parallel to the horizon line. Its corners, right, would be attached there. And it'd be the exact same thing if I put a 1-point object over here, except now that's floating in the sky. Right, so if that's the footprint, the bottom or the top, right, of a 1-point object, top or front and back still parallel to the horizon line, lateral edges still go here. 2-point, it's hardly different. Still using the same vanishing points as a regular 2-point. Okay, now, the salient difference between a high crop and a low crop and a regular 1-point and 2-point is now all of your vertical lines that in a regular 1-point and 2-point would be perpendicular to the horizon line. The only line that you're going to have, only vertical line that you're going to have that's perpendicular to the horizon line is something that lines up perfectly with the center of vision. Because that's going to tell you exactly what's in front of you. Again, remember, that's directly in between the eyes of a hypothetical viewer. Now, when you tilt your head up or tilt the camera up, or when you tilt the camera down, you're tilting this hypothetical viewer's head up or down, and their view is basically sliding up along this center of vision or down along this center of vision, right? Because when you tilt your head up, it's not like you're tilting your head up and your eyes somewhere over here all of a sudden, right? It has to be, in line with where your head is, with where your center of vision is. So technically, where this vanishing point goes for a 3-point upshot, which is going to be something above the horizon line, or a 3-point downshot, which is something below the horizon line, can be anywhere along this vertical line, technically speaking. In practice, it doesn't really work that way. Because what you'll experience is the closer that vanishing point gets towards the horizon line, the more difficult the drawing is going to be to do because the system starts to collapse in on itself because of the amount of distortion that you experience. So the further that vanishing point gets away from the horizon line along this center line, the easier the drawing becomes to do. Right? And it's important to know that the 3-point upshot vanishing point is separate from the 3-point downshot vanishing point. These two things are an entirely different perspectives, right? The same way that a low crop and a high crop are entirely different perspectives. You cannot have them inside the same picture. right? An upshot and a downshot. As soon as you start to cross that bridge, you're either doing it for very particular distortion reasons, right? Some examples I'll point out in the Roger Rabbit example, or you're doing it because, what was the example that was put? Or you're crossing over into the realm of curve perspective, right? Where you actually can incorporate upshots and downshots inside the same scene. Okay, so what's important about a 3-point upshot is that your frame needs to be up here for a 3-point upshot. For a 3-point downshot, your frame needs to be down here so that we're creating the effect of looking up and looking down. But now we're physically tilting the camera. How much we tilt the camera is going to be determined by how close the vertical lines are that, or the recessional lines are that we're dealing with to this center line, or how far away they get. How far away they get and how extreme your viewpoint is determined by where you put your vanishing point along this center line. And it's going to be the same for everybody, so that you're all dealing with the same restrictions in the class. Think of it this way. If you take the distance from your 1 point to your 2 point and take that distance and then just duplicate it up here. If you remember back to the very first class, that's where we have your station point above the horizon line. You do the exact same thing down here. That's where your station point would be below the horizon line. For purposes of this assignment, what I'd like you to do, right, is now take half of the distance from your station point to the 1 point, and now add it to the top of that station point along this vertical line. That's going to be your 3-point vanishing point for your upshot. And you can do the exact same thing below the horizon line. Take half the distance from the 1 point to the station point, add it to the top of that, extend that center of vision, and that becomes your 3-point vanishing point for your downshot. So what that means is that all vertical lines now are going to go there for your upshot. All vertical lines for your downshot are going to go here. So again, the only vertical line that you're going to have that's going to be perfectly vertical or perfectly perpendicular to the horizon line is any line that lines up with your center of vision. Everything else is going to angle out like this as you get further and further away from the center of vision. So as we get closer and closer towards the center of vision here and here, that's when we get pictures that have this type of feel to them, that have the inflection of a very subtle upshot or downshot, because the vertical lines are hardly different than what a low crop or a high crop would look like. But as we get out into these areas here, that's where we start to get into these areas. Extreme upshots, extreme downshots that are hardly different from a bird's eye view or a worm's eye view, because they start to more closely and closely resemble what a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view would look like. So that means if I want to draw this object here, all of the vertical lines of this thing, let's say that this is the top of the building, all of the vertical lines and those 4 corners of that building now get connected to that point there. The bottom of the building is constructed the same way as the top of the building. So wherever this line is going to that 1 point, the bottom of that building goes to the same point until it crosses over the 2 lines that are receding to your vertical line. The bottom of this, or the front of this building, is parallel to the horizon line. The bottom of that building will also be parallel to the horizon line, and until it intersects with the vertical line that's receding here. So now again, it not only feels like I'm looking down on that building, now it actually looks like I'm looking down on the building. This is what stuff looks like when we look down or look up at it at a tilt. Same thing with a 2 point. Like I can treat this as a footprint and draw up from there. Vertical lines will still go here and here and here. But now the top of that building is going to be connected on this side to its respective 1 point. Same thing here That gets attached over there. This gets attached over there. This gets attached over there. So now I've got, in this instance, a short, fat building that I can see the top of. Now I could take that building right up off the page if I wanted to, where I maybe can't see the top of that building. But I can see the top of the building if I so choose to. So that means all interior detail will also go to the same vanishing points. And the front and back, top and bottom, and all the details that are associated with that face in a 1 point will all be parallel to the horizon line, where all the details on this side of the building will also go to its central vanishing point. Details here, vertical lines, all vertical lines lead to Rome. All detail lines go to their respective vanishing points. So if I was to put this, make some sort of arbitrary street scene out of this, all the stuff on the ground is controlled by this vanishing point here, or these vanishing points there. Right? But if I want to put a street lamp here, that street lamp, the vertical side goes there. And because this section of the street is in 2 point, the top of that thing goes there, etc. And that goes for any object, right? So if I want to put in a cylindrical object here, my ellipse at the base is still just going to be an ellipse. And then the vertical sides of that ellipse go to that vanishing point. Top of that object just becomes a thinner ellipse. Central pivot point would be the same. So if I want to put something conical on the top of that, that central pivot point would identify where the peak of that thing is. So if I want to do this up here, now all of your vertical lines still get attached to this point, right? Because again, this drawing and this drawing are totally separate things. If I want a building that's kind of floating in the sky, all vertical lines go here. All lateral lines for my 2 point go to the same vanishing points that any other 2 point would. So I'd be able to see the underside of that building if it was floating in the sky. If I don't want a building floating in the sky, I just extend that line to the frame and let the frame itself physically complete the object. All details inside that shape go to their respective vanishing points. Lateral ones go here and here. Vertical ones go there. Same thing with a 1 point object. All vertical lines there. Front and back, top and bottom, parallel to the horizon line. Lateral lines go to your 1 point. Vertical lines go there. There's my 1 point object floating in the sky. If I don't want it floating in the sky, extend those to the frame. All vertical lines of details go to the same spot. All interior details, depending on their face, are going to be parallel to the top and the bottom, or go back to their respective 1 point vanishing point. That's all there is to it, right? In terms of a 3 point up and a 3 point down shot, in terms of like a basic construction. Now, that being said, I mean, this is background noise for me, right? This makes sense, right? But this may become fuzzy, right? For some of you somewhere along the line. If it's fuzzy now, it ain't gonna get less fuzzy. So this would be a great time to ask, right, about the fuzziness. How's this sit for everyone?
In
Okay. Go ahead.
in a weird way, I find this is easier to comprehend than when we did bird's eye and worm's eye.
Yeah, well, because bird's eye and worm's eye are just it's a very artificial, very restrictive way of doing something similar to this. And because it's so restrictive, things tend to kind of look a little bit weird, right, with them. So even though you're only controlling one vanishing point, as like I said last class, it's not difficult to draw it. It's difficult to kind of like make sense of it. And it becomes increasingly difficult when things start to look weird inside the picture, because the natural assumption is like, did I fuck it up? I mean, because you're not familiar with it. This is much more difficult, right, in terms of drawing, because there's just more things to control, but it's because it's much more flexible and much more reflective of us just like physically looking down. Even as I'm looking down on my page like this, things start to take on that shape. We generally don't look straight down like this. We're straight up like that. It's a weird perspective, right, for us to take on. Okay, so it's not surprising that this makes a little bit more sense, but I'm glad that it makes a little bit more sense, because that makes my job essentially easier, which is always nice. Okay, is anybody confused by this at all?
Not confused by this, but I do have a question.
Okay.
Could you explain the reason why the horizon line shouldn't be in the frame?
Absolutely, right, and I'll do that right now by explaining the restrictions or the limitations of this, like why this shouldn't happen. Okay, so as I mentioned, the perspective will still work. So let's just do two different drawings. There's my horizon line. There's my vanishing points along it. There's my central or my vertical vanishing point. Quit fucking with me. Okay, so all my vertical lines are going to go here. All my lateral lines go here. Now, the whole point of doing something in 3-point for purposes of this assignment is to exaggerate the effect, right, and also mimic the effect of looking up at something so that we can exaggerate a dominant perspective in this instance. So if I want to make it look like I'm looking up at a 2-point building, if I crop that there, that looks like I'm looking up at that thing. Right? And as a result, I get a realistic effect, but also an emotional effect out of it. Now, if I cross the horizon line, it's not like these lines just burst into flames, right, as you cross the horizon line. They still exist. But as I cross over, now the perspective for the lateral lines still go to the same spot. And now that's what that building looks like. Now the question is, does that look like you're looking up at that building? What does your horizon line represent on a person's face?
The height of the middle between the eyes.
That's this. So that means that your horizon line is the eye level. So when we look at this, we know intuitively, subconsciously, whether or not we understand this, your audience understands this or not, they can position themselves with respect to that object, which means that they know, without really knowing why, that they're not looking up at this thing, which means that this thing isn't receding in perspective. This thing is just a weird shape now. Right? This thing feels like it's now leaning over, so to speak, as opposed to, right, being something that's receding. And if I change the shape of that building so that it's a little bit more exaggerated, maybe it becomes a bit more obvious.
This would be like fisheye view, right?
Not fisheye. Fisheye view is when you're physically warping from this point or this perspective point down to another perspective point, or from here to this
But it's
point.
very similar to it, like if you do it like this.
Similar in the sense that, yeah, it's a more extreme perspective, but dissimilar in the sense that fisheye, by definition, incorporates curved lines, curved space. We're still dealing with straight lines here.
Okay.
So look what happens. So let's say that this is my crop here. I get this effect for that. But now if I change that to cropping that here, See the difference? Now now it feels like I'm looking up. Here, I've got a distorted building. Right? And there's lots of reasons why you might do this, right? So for example, let's say that this is my 3-point downshot. Same restrictions go here. All your vertical lines do this, or all your lateral lines do this. All of your vertical lines do this. Now, if I was to draw an object in 3-point here and stop it there, again, that looks fine. I'm looking down on that. As soon as I cross over the horizon line, the perspective still works, but now I've got a funny shaped object. So this is a really useful way of creating differently shaped objects inside the space, right, of, say, regular rectilinear shaped objects. You know, if you're designing something, say a postmodern landscape, right, with, you know, anti-modern shaped buildings that are generally rectilinear. So if we're looking at the side of a modern building, that's what the side of a modern building might look like. The side of a postmodern building, right, fucked up art museums and stuff like that, right, might look like that. Right, so this becomes an effective way of changing the shape of a particular thing. It also becomes a really effective way of exaggerating certain things. So for example, right, you guys watched the clip from Roger Rabbit, yes? Okay, so what's the point of Roger Rabbit, or what's the whole point of that sequence? What does the baby want? What does Roger want? And what's Roger's motivation? What's the baby's motivation?
To get the cookies.
To get the cookies. What's Roger's job in that sequence?
To like keep the baby safe.
Keep the baby safe. What's Roger's motivation in order to keep the baby safe?
Did he have a motivation?
What's that?
Did he have a motivation?
He certainly did. What happens to Roger if anything?
The people who keep him, they will get mad. So
they'll get mad. Specifically, they'll send him back to the science lab.
yeah.
Right. So, understandably, Roger doesn't want to go back to the science lab. Right. So the first time that you see this crib with baby Herman in it, you see it like this. Baby sitting in crib, right? Similar to the way that the Ghost in the Shell character was introduced, similar to the way that the Morpheus character is sitting in the chair when Neo kicks the shit out of it with the Gatling gun, or the building with the Gatling gun, right? All the characters are introduced like this. This is a very effective way of introducing characters to an audience because it basically puts that character directly across from your audience, helps to identify with them. It also uses perspective to develop focus by leading your eye towards that particular point through perspective lines, as we've already talked about. What it also introduces is a very stable perspective, right? Which is one of the uses emotionally of one point. Now, the next time that you see the crib, it's like this, right? When Roger notices that it's empty. So they specifically distort it, right? By incorporating this 3-point vanishing point and crossing the horizon line and incorporating even more, they actually exaggerated even more by dropping your 2 points even further inside the frame to more radically exaggerate the crib. Right, now the question is, why would you make that choice? What's the point of showing the crib like this? Like, why not just show it like this again?
To exaggerate the feelings.
Okay, what feelings?
Stress.
Stress
Anxiety,
on whose part?
Roger's.
Roger's part. Okay, so what's the problem with the crib when Roger sees it like this?
It doesn't make sense.
No, it makes sense.
No. I mean, like, the baby should be there, so it doesn't make sense that it's not there.
The baby should be there. And what's the problem with the baby not being there?
He will get punished.
Go get punished. Go back to the science lab, right? So the question is like, how does this crib feel as opposed to this crib here?
Wrong.
Does this
Like-
crib does this crib feel more or less dangerous?
More dangerous.
More
More
dangerous.
dangerous. And what they also do, I mean, I haven't drawn it exactly correctly. They also drop the horizon line right inside that scene so that the crib actually looks something more like this. Right, so the crib, when it's like shown like this, it feels more dangerous. Does it feel more or less important?
More important.
More important. And right, it feels more important, right, because we're looking up at more of it. It feels more dangerous. The simple answer is because sharp and pointy things feel more dangerous than flat and stable things. So even though it's the same crib, it's shown differently, and as a result, it's entirely different. For all intents and purposes, it's an entirely different crib, right? Because you've shown it in an entirely different way to communicate something radically different. So I'm not saying that you can't cross the horizon line, right, for a purpose or for when you're using this type of perspective. What I am saying is that for purposes of this assignment, you can't cross the horizon line, right? Because what we're looking for is this as an effect, right? Or this as an effect, right? We're not looking for this, right? Or for fucked up building effect. Okay, so much like everything else that I say in this class, there's exceptions to every particular rule as to why you might want to break the rules that I'm presenting, right? But I find it particularly useful to know the rules before you start bending and breaking and twisting them so that you know why things function the way that they do and how to bend, break, or twist them, right, at your leisure. Okay, so does this answer the question as to like why you can't incorporate the horizon line in the frame?
So it's more of a to fit this assignment thing. It's still it's still possible and can be used in some way, but it's not actually physically can't.
Yeah, exactly. You can't, right? You physically can't if you're trying to create the effect of looking up or looking down.
Foreground. But for other effects, it would be possible or sometimes
Exactly.
intentionally used. Sure, thanks.
Exactly. Okay, so because you crop the horizon line out of the frame, there are certain things that you can do that are really useful that I would encourage you guys to give a try. Now there's a breakdown of how to do all this stuff in your handout step by step, right? So this is all easily reinforceable just by opening those illustrious pages. Now, what I mean by you can use this, right? It opens up possibilities is that as soon as you disassociate the frame and the horizon line from each other, you've essentially cropped your audience out of the viewing experience. And as a result, what can't your audience establish, right, inside of a picture that's either a high crop or a low crop or a bird's eye view, or sorry, or a 3-point upshot or a 3-point downshot?
Where they are.
They can't establish where they are, right? And as a result, what also can't you establish? We did it 2 assignments ago. No, we did it the last assignment. No, 2 assignments ago. What was the first part of your assignment when you were drawing the boxes? What was the point of that?
A 3-point, 6-point, and 1-point vanishing or
So what were you controlling there?
The height of the audience.
The height of the audience, right? But also of the object. What were you controlling of the object?
The height of the object.
The scale of the object. So if you get rid of the horizon line, what can't you establish?
how
Scale.
big or small things are.
How big or small things are, right? Because you need a relationship between the horizon line and the ground plane in order to do that. So basically what that frees up is expressive possibilities with perspective. So let's say that arbitrarily, I want to put a building here. Now, that building might be on the street corner. That looks something like that. Might have a crosswalk, something like this, blah, blah, blah. I can arbitrarily say that this line right here, this thing right here, is the side of another building. And I don't have to have that hook up with anything be associated with the ground plane of this drawing at all, which means that inside this building, I can now put a window, still drawn perspectively correctly. And now that window is on the side of a building that's really close to the viewer. And I can put a person leaning out of that window, looking out onto the street. And through the back. Okay, now this provides an option, right, to bring your audience further or closer away to the picture by incorporating, right, what's called foreground, right, information. I'll refer to this as FG from this point forward. We're not going to start focusing on this until the second term, right, but I encourage you to experiment with it, right, because basically I can take that same foreground object and I can change it entirely and change everything in the picture as a result. I can make that window this small, right, and make that person inside that window that small. And you see how that changes the picture? So I get rid of that and change it to that. Now I've got an entirely different proximity to that picture, right? And all I've done is change the nature of the foreground information. Right? And you can do this, right, basically at a whim. So if I have another picture, right, similar type of sidewalk, right, and downshot, right, I can arbitrarily like put you on the back of a bird, right, flying over top of that scene. As long as it makes sense that that thing would exist there, then you can do stuff like this, right, because you don't have this association to the horizon. Right? What it also means is that you have an intuitive sense of scale, right, when you start to incorporate details into a picture. So what I mean by that is that I know roughly about how big a door should be in relationship to a building. I know roughly about how tall a lamppost should be with relationship to that building. So if I try to put in a fire hydrant here that's this big, that's fucking weird, right? Because I know that this scale intuitively doesn't make sense with its surroundings. A fire hydrant like this does make sense. Okay, so you do have the option to establish a sense of scale. It's just in a much more intuitive, common sense type of way. And you can do the exact same thing with an upshot. So if I want to put a 1-point building here, and let's just say that, you know, it's going to be that far away from you in terms of like how big windows are in relationship to the building. If I want a person to take on the perspective of, say, a person, so I want the viewer to think that they're looking at this thing from a human's perspective. I'm roughly familiar with how big street signs are. So if I put a street sign in here that looks like this, well, that's kind of familiar to my experience of what a street sign would look like if I was standing below it, right, looking up at this scene. Right, so basically what you've now done is you've positioned your audience, just like you have here, in a certain relationship to what it is that you see. You're looking at it from a person's point of view, for example. Well, let's say that I take that object and arbitrarily change it. So that object now is no longer street sign, right? That object is now fire hydrant. Now whose viewpoint am I looking at this from? potentially.
Like a dog.
A dog, a rat, a baby, something like that. I can physically take the audience, right, and move them as far down as this. Like I can put them literally in the gutter by showing them the side of the sidewalk. Right? And maybe, you know, somebody's shoe, right, and pant cuff, right, as they're walking by. Right? And that's all because you crop the horizon line up. You have this capacity to do this kind of thing. Right? Now, again, like if I put a bird flying in the air here, it's not going to make any sense. Right? Just like the fire hydrant doesn't make sense here. Right? So this is like, again, a common sense type of thing. Again, I encourage you to do this because what this does is it brings your audience closer to the picture and pulls them further away from the picture. It's the difference between like watching me teach like this and watching me teach like this, right? They're very different experiences. This would be fucking weird if I taught the class like this. Right? Although, I mean, you either revile against, right, that amount of intrusion into your lives or pay a lot more attention, right, to it, right, because of that proximity. Right, so these decisions are decisions that you'll be making for reasons as we go forward. This is kind of like a brief introduction to this. And with a high crop, it's the exact same thing. So because the horizon line's down here, the only difference, right, between a high crop and a 3-point is that the high crop's easier to do. Looks a little less sexy, right, because you don't have any sort of vertical lines that are diagonal, right? But you can do the exact same thing with that fire hydrant. Right, in terms of positioning an audience. You can do the exact same thing with this object and this street scene. Right, the only difference is that those vertical lines don't go anywhere. They're just perpendicular to the horizon line. Okay, so this is an incredibly useful and powerful tool, right, to start playing around with. Right? And again, I couldn't recommend more that, you know, you kind of start playing with that. Now, in terms of the practicality of setting this up for your assignment, because you're going to have to do both of these, right, for your assignment. If you can do one, you can generally do the other. If this is your page, nice. If this is your piece of paper, the easiest way to do this assignment is to, if you're going to be doing a downshot, a 3-point downshot, is push your horizon line all the way to the top of your page and push your vanishing points out as far as they can on the page, as far as you can on the page. So that your central vanishing point is right in the middle. And that means that your station point will be right at the bottom of your piece of paper. Because what you're going to experience with a 3-point is that as you get out towards the peripheral areas of your drawing, a lateral line that's going to your 2-point and a vertical line that's going to your 3-point, at a certain point, those two things are going to become the exact same angle. Which means that your drawing is going to start to look really weird when you get out here. Which means that you probably want to crop your frame or make your frame a little bit smaller with respect to those perspective lines, because now in here, you know that all of your vertical lines and lateral lines are going to work relatively well because you've cropped out the areas that are difficult or problematic. So if this is the size of your page for this assignment only, right, this is how big your frame can be in relationship to it. Now, if you want your drawing to be bigger, right, there's a way around this. If this is how big your frame is, right, and this is how big your piece of paper is, if you want your frame to be that big, all you need to do is make sure that your horizon or your vanishing points are much further away from each other. So you can make those vanishing points as far away from each other as you want. The only difference is that now you have to keep track of where these things are off the frame, right? Or off the paper, rather. So, you know, one answer to that is you might take this piece of paper and tape it to a much bigger piece of paper. So that then, you know, you can do a larger drawing. And not have to worry about any sort of distortion that you're going to experience. Okay, so that's just a practical thing that's particularly useful to approach this assignment with. Okay, so before I get into describing your assignment, do you guys have any questions about this?
Yes, could you say one more time why you would use the 3-point, like the two pictures bottom that you drew? One's in 3-point, one's in the, yeah, those two. Why would you use the 3-point again?
Why?
Yeah, in regards to the other one.
As opposed to this?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, we think about things, right, in terms of like the angles of lines, angles of objects, angles of what's called any sort of perceptual category. Angles we find more exciting. Right? They basically mimic the variety of nature a lot better. Right? And as a result, they introduce or rather increase what are called visual dynamics into a picture. Vertical lines tend to exaggerate a sense of tension, whereas diagonal lines tend to exaggerate a sense of drama. Right? So the reason you might choose between these is like maybe you just want something to look a little sexier, right, as opposed to this. Right? But also maybe you want this to feel more dramatic as opposed to more tense. Right? But also, I mean, it might just be for sheerly practical reasons as well. Maybe this confuses the hell out of you, right? And this makes more sense, and you kind of get the same sort of thing as a result of it. Right? So there's practical and, you know, theoretical applications, emotional applications to this.
Okay.
It's a good question. Okay, any questions about the technical nuts and bolts about how to do this? Okay, your assignment then, and this is the reason why I wanted you to watch a lot of those examples, is because this is a very particular way or a very standard way of developing power relationships between characters. So remember when we were cropping, right, that initial scene, right, that master shot, right, and, you know, I had character A up here and character B down here, and we cropped them like this, right, to give a variety of scenes. We've now established that character as a dominant perspective, this character as a diminutive character, and when we put those high crop and low crop next to each other, right, that exaggerates that relationship between them. That makes those characters feel even more dominant and diminutive with respect to each other because they've been contrasted with each other. So this is a really typical way of showing the change in power relationships without actually saying anything. So the Batman-Bane example, that fight, right? You know immediately when you see those two characters introduced in that, you see the Batman character in an eye level perspective, right? And as soon as Bane shows up, you see him in a 3-point upshot. That immediately identifies this character as the character not to be fucked with. Right? And every time that you see the Batman character, it's either like this or in a downshot. And then every time you see the Batman character in a downshot, you see the Bane character in an upshot. Right? Because there is no point during that sequence where the Batman character is winning. Right? Feels like they're in control of that situation. Right? The Bane character is always in control of that situation. So for purposes of your assignment, I want you to, I can't remember if I made this an interior or an exterior scene. Doesn't matter. I want you to do 2 drawings. Right, of, let's say that it's an interior scene. Actually, no. So interior, exterior, doesn't matter. But 2 drawings of the same scene. Okay. Drawing number 1 is going to be a 3-point upshot. drawing number 2 is a 3-point downshot. Not surprising. The addition that I want to throw into this is that in your upshot, I want you to include a character. In this scene, I want you to include a protagonist. In this scene, I want you to include an antagonist. Right, so that you're using those perspectives as a way of exaggerating power relationships between hero and villain, so to speak. Good guy, bad guy, winner, loser, right? Alive, dead, right? Etc. Right? Because this is going to be a standard thing that you need to do. Now, if you're freaking out right now because you don't draw characters, right, or you're concerned about drawing characters or have no interest in drawing characters, right? This isn't a character design class, again. Right? So first off, be realistic with yourself in terms of like where you're at in terms of drawing ability, right, and your ability to draw characters. But also, right, keep in mind that the point of this assignment is to draw these perspectives as opposed to the characters. So I had a student in a previous class that did something like this. Every time that a character was required, this is the character that they used. Which is great, right? Because it's super simple to draw and it made me laugh, right? So it's a win-win. Because that character in the 3-point downshot might look something like that. Super easy to draw. Same thing. This character in a 3-point upshot might look something like that. So the reason that I want you to incorporate these characters into your assignment is not to spend all of your time designing and creating a character, but it's to make that character feel like they fit inside the space in the same perspective, right? So that you can communicate that power relationship, show that power relationship rather than tell somebody about it, right? And have them feel like they fit inside that space, right? Realistically. And so that you don't have a 2-dimensional cutout inside of a 3-dimensional space, right? Or a 1-point, 2-point character inside of a 3-point environment. Okay, so that's your assignment. Again, furthering the exploration of a single space with different viewpoints. Right, so these will become background information that are potentials for your thumbnails from this point forward. Today is going to be the last perspective assignment that we kind of do, right? This is all the perspective that we're going to do. From this point forward, we're still going to be using perspective, just applications of it, right? As a way of moving more into compositional stuff, right? And perspective as a tool, right? As opposed to an ends in and of itself. So any questions about your assignment, right? Or about 3-point in general?
For like protagonist and antagonist, do they both have to be characters, or can it be something like the 3-point upshot is a mouse trap that a mouse is looking up at?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, what I mean, essentially what you're doing is that you're putting something in a dominant, something in a diminutive position. What those things are really doesn't matter all that much, right? As long as it becomes evident, right, that there is this relationship being developed between those things. Characters is just a very easy way to do that because we automatically tend to identify more with characters than we do with, say, stationary objects. Much easier to identify with a person than a lamppost, so to speak. Although not impossible. Probably easier to identify with some lampposts than some people in many cases. I know a bunch of them. I'm sure you do too. Okay, any questions before we move on and look at examples?
Can you just go back through all your drawings so we can screenshot them?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Things I forget. These are the days we know, these are the days we know. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that this was the first page. Okay, so this is all pretty clearly broken down in your handout as well. It's so like this handout is so clear that there's really no need for me to go back, right, and go over it because it would just be beating a dead horse. Okay, so these are the reasons not to cross the horizon line page, but also reasons that you might want to in future endeavors. Expressive possibilities with 3-point high crop and low crop. By the way, you can crop, a 3-point drawing with a Dutch as well as a way of further exaggerating it as well, right, if you so chose. And then your assignment. Now, what I'm going to do with the examples, and the reason that I wanted you to watch them, right, is because some of them are very, very typical. So the matrix example, the Bane fight example, those are really standard versions, right, of how to use a 3-point up and a 3-point down shot, up shots and down shots in general. I'm not going to elaborate upon those, right, because you've already watched them. And again, it would just be kicking a dead horse. But there are certain things that I do want to go over and show, some just for humor value, others because there's different ways of using 3 points, right, or 3-point up and down shots, right? So for instance, like one of the reasons that you might want to use up, down shots, right, in perspective is that it's showing power relations. Right? It's like one character is winning, one character is losing. Another reason that you might want to show it, though, is narrative progression. Right? So the Roger Rabbit example is a good example of that. If you go back and watch that clip, the baby basically starts here in an extreme downshot with the cookies here. And as the baby gets closer and closer to its goal, the perspectives gradually start to get closer and closer together, to the point where once the baby is directly next to the cookies, we're in this perspective, right? And every time something bad happens to the baby, right, potentially dangerous, the perspective widens again, right? So you're literally going on a perspective journey as you're going through this narrative progression. Right? And it's a nice way of, again, using visuals as a way of showing things that accentuate, what we typically more easily relate to: dialogue, character actions, character expression, right? The way that you can house those things in time or inside of a picture makes a huge difference in the effectiveness of that picture. So I think what we'll start with is just because it's easy and fun, we'll do the Batman Bane thing, right? And I'm just gonna quickly go over this because it really doesn't require much. In the way of explanation. Oh, you've just convinced me never to buy whatever this is. This is my favorite part of the movie right here. Okay, but before we get to my favorite part, this is how you see the Batman character when you open up on him. Right? Perfectly eye level. You can tell where the eye level is because of the flattening of your perspective lines. Here. This is how you see the Bane character. Do not fuck with this character. Turn around and walk away. And every time you see that character, you see that character in that perspective. This is a fun part. Oh, not that one. A little bit too late. No, That part right there. I like this part a lot. He punches him with his own hand. There. There's your typical progression right here. This character is losing, downshot. This character is winning, upshot. Standard. Right? You'll use this tool all the time. This will be one of the most effective tools and the easiest to remember tools that you'll get. My favorite part in this movie, though, right here. I don't mean just in this clip. I do mean this movie. Right here. Bane punches Batman so hard that he turns on that spotlight. It's so dumb. That's great. Okay, so that's a really formulaic way of using an upshot and a downshot. And that's going to be the way you see it most of the time. The Batman Joker scene. This is slightly more interesting, actually significantly more interesting. Because it starts off with a very standard use of upshot, downshot. And then they do something really interesting. So here's your standard use. Joker's in an upshot, Joker's in control. Easy. Batman's in a downshot, Batman's in trouble. Easy. Now what you'll typically experience right in these progressions as well is a reversal of fortune because these characters will trade places. Right, so there's his little ninja job here, chucks him over the edge. Oh, reversal of fortune, downshot, extreme downshot, extreme reversal of fortune. So this character is now losing. Cut to upshot. This character is now winning. Right, so that's a pretty standard way of showing this stuff as well. Now, the interesting part of this isn't any of this because this is really typical. What isn't typical is what they do once he hauls him back up with the quickest shoulder workout known to man. So here you have the Joker right in a downshot. Here you've got the Batman character in an upshot, right? So typical stuff. Now, what do they do with the camera here?
They make a Dutch tilt and make it like turn until he looks as if he's on like upshot.
He's an upshot, right? But you know that he's actually hanging upside down. So you're kind of simultaneously looking up and looking down, right, at this person at the same time, right? And you're also looking up at the Batman character. Okay, so now a better question is, why would you make this choice? What's the point of doing this? What's the point of showing this character like this and also showing that that camera is turning like that?
Even though he's in trouble, he has some power.
Okay, so there's a literal turning of the tables here. Like you thought that character was defeated. That character's now played their ace in the hole, so to speak, turned the tables. This character's now in a power relationship, etc. Now also, and this is the deeply interesting. So that's a nice use of cinematography. There, it's clever. Right? I think a much more interesting point that this is making, though, through cinematography, through this change, though, is the character relationship between the Batman and the Joker character here. Right? So what might this metaphorically be saying about the relationship that these two characters have with each other? And they say it a number of times in the movie. Actually, in the sequence, they say it as well.
Well, they go back and forth, and like Joker says, "I won't kill you because you're fun," and he says like, "You won't kill me because you're too righteous."
Right. So they're like a you complete me Jerry Maguire type of
Yeah,
thing, right, in
yeah.
some sort of fucked up way. Right. And one of the nice things about this particular instance of the franchise is that they do this multiple times during the film, where they show these two essentially outsiders from the normal social warp and woof of things, essentially playing by their own rules, but one character is good, one character is bad. I mean, they've adopted their own moral codes, but outside of the general social moral code. So it's like one, I think, very strong argument that is being made for why they're showing this way is that this character is essentially kind of like an upside down, bizarro version of the Batman character. I mean, the Two-Face character in this movie would be another very obvious example of that same thing, right? Where you have good and bad wrapped up inside of a single person. Right? So this is a really nice example of doing something very clever and very complicated with a very simple tool, but again, bending and breaking that tool, right, in order to do something a little bit more complicated. The other example that I wanted you to watch was the There Will Be Blood scene. And this introduces something that will become more important for us later on, right, called bracketing. Right, now, this won't be important for us until we get like literally right to the end of the course. But it'll be something that I'm kind of going to be referring to obliquely as we go forward. This is also a really good example of using an upshot to not make a person feel powerful. Right? So if you've watched this sequence, right, does this person feel like they're in control of this sequence?
No.
No. Right? What does that person feel like?
Under pressure.
Definitely under pressure. Does this character feel like they're happy about this circumstance?
No.
No.
No. What is this character being forced to do right now?
To
And how,
submit to whatever the preacher was saying.
yeah, and how would you be feeling if you were this character? Like, this is always a good way to kind of think about what you want to do with a picture, right? Or what a picture is trying to communicate to you, is put yourself in that position. How would you feel if you were this character? Is this character a proud or a humble person?
He looks like a proud person.
Does this character like the people or dislike the character or the people that he's surrounded by?
Definitely
Dislike.
dislikes.
He intensely dislikes these people. Right. So this person is essentially being forced to confess, right, in front of a group of people that he deeply dislikes, and he's forced to engage in an act that he equally dislikes, right, and forced to do that by a person that he intensely dislikes. If you were that character, how would you feel?
Almost like
Oh.
trapped.
Trapped, for sure. Anything else?
Hopeless, helpless.
Helpless?
I would probably shatter.
Shattered?
Yeah.
Shattered, yeah. Yeah. It certainly makes an impact on this character. Would it be too far to say that this character feels humiliated
Oh yes.
Yeah.
in front of these people? Okay, so my question then, right, to you guys is, why would you show this character in an upshot if that's what this character is feeling?
To exaggerate the emotions he's feeling.
Exaggerate the emotions he's feeling, right? So you can use these tools, right, as not only a way of making things feel important, but making feelings feel important, if that makes sense. Exaggerate the feeling. Because what you're going to get out of this character here in this whole sequence is the opening of a bracket. And you can think of a bracket as basically exactly what it looks like in a sentence. Right? You've got a small section of a sentence that relates to the larger section. And in order to start that small part that relates to it, you open a bracket, and when it's done, you close that bracket. Right? The way that this works visually is you do stuff like this, right? Where you have this character kneeling in front of a cross, right? And then performing an action that they deeply dislike, right? And being forced to do it by somebody that they also deeply dislike. And that whole thing is shown in an upshot. Right? Now, the reason that this is important, right, is because the other clip that I wanted you to watch closes that bracket, and it reintroduces all of that information. No, too far. This one's always difficult to find. If you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. This is as close to a perfect movie as you're likely to get.
Well, I wish you had like put there that there would be like massive spoilers.
You're in film school, dude. What did you think you were going to get? I once had that. I was giving an art history lecture, and I was talking about the difference between Greek and Roman culture. And I was using the films Gladiator and the series Rome as a way of distinguishing between imperial and republican Rome. And I was talking about one episode in Rome, the series, as when Julius Caesar gets assassinated, right? And one of the students is like, no, don't tell us. He's like, I don't know how it knows. And it's like, dude, this happened fucking 2,000 years ago. It's like telling you that somebody didn't kill Jesus, right? It's like, no, the guy's dead. Super dead. Okay, so here, look at all the similarities. You get an upshot, this character confessing to something he really doesn't want to confess to, the iconography of a cross, and being forced to do that in the presence of somebody that they deeply dislike, right? Or at the mercy of. And as soon as that character confesses to this character's sufficiency, look at the shot that you immediately cut into. You cut up into a close-up of this character now in a traditional upshot, right? Where now this character has all the control in that scene. Right? And what's even better about this sequence is where it goes from there. Because where it goes from there is this sequence, right? Where that character essentially, lords it over the other character that he's won. Ugh. And look at how they level things out here. Right, so they now show those characters, right, in high level perspectives in relationship to each other. And what does that say about these two characters now?
They have the same worth.
The same worth, right? Or they're equally powered, right, in this position. So you think what's going to happen here, right, or one of the expectations that you're going to have here, right, is that, okay, this character won this battle. This character, right, and this character are now on an equal playing field, and this character is in effect begging for mercy. Right? And you're led to think because of this equality that you might get that. Right, but then this is one of my favorite parts of the movie is this right here. This essentially, right, takes that possibility away. So the other character, keep in mind, is talking right now. Right? Look at what you get to look at though, right? As that character is talking. What takes up the entirety of the screen?
His ass.
Daniel Day-Lewis's ass. Right? So that character has literally been eclipsed in the rudest, most painfully obvious way that you can imagine. They literally cease to become important, right, at that point, right? Because from this point forward, all you get is a traditional use of upshots and downshots positioning in the frame, right? This character standing over top of this character, right? And in this sense, literally forcing the character down and backwards in the frame. Until you get to this sequence, which I think we'll put the sound on for because it's amazing.
Help me, standing boy! I am the third revelation. I am the third revelation.
That's right, the traditional way of using an upshot. And I will save the end of this for it. Well, actually, you've seen this whole clip, so it doesn't matter. Right. There's your traditional use. Upshot, I'm winning. Downshot, you're dead. Okay, so really good examples of really complicated uses, right? And inventive uses of, right, this simple tool, right? But also really excellent examples of really standard uses of that simple tool. Okay, again, I think that it will repay. I still catch things, right, from watching these movies, right? And I've seen them countless times, right, at this point. So if this is something of interest to you, or especially if it's going to be something that you're going to be pursuing more specifically as you go forth educationally, professionally, it will repay your efforts to rewatch these things, right, and catch this stuff again and again. Okay, those are all the words that need to come out of my face other than answering your questions either individually or general. So I'll take the individual ones after the fact, but do you guys have any general questions about this assignment, what we've just done, etc.?
All good.
Sounds that way. Okay, well, if you don't have any individual questions, you're free to go. I will see you next class. This is due same time, same bad channel as is useful, or as is usual. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you then.
I have
Thank
one
you.
question about my assignment.
Okay, so again, right, as soon as we're done, right, we'll fill those in order. So otherwise, we're all good. We're all good, guys.
Yeah, thanks for class. I'm gonna head off and get documentary stuff sorted out.
Good
Okay.
luck.
Good.
Actually, I have a question that's not exactly about class, but it did come out when, like, I think it was Omen and I were chatting, that I have to ask you.
Sure.
Sure. What do you think about the movie Into the Spider-Verse?
It's amazing. It's one of the best movies that's been made in the last 10.
Yeah, we expect
No, it
that.
is. It is essentially a perfect film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, it's what makes it even more impressive as a perfect film is that it's so formulaic, right? There are no surprises at all in that movie. You know, the twist of who the villain is the twist that you would expect, right? The, you know, gradual coming to grips with your own self-confidence, right? In terms of becoming the hero that you were always meant to be. That's never in question. You know, the subplots, right, of romantic relationships and entanglements, right, and other heroes being involved, the mentor, right, all of that shit there. You've seen it 1,000 times, but they fucking crush it. And it's so good to see something done that's so easily expected, done so well, that it's a very gratifying experience, right? For, you know, especially somebody like myself, who I think is, you know, sees this stuff as really important, right? But also because you've seen it done so many times and seen it done poorly so many times. So no, it's an amazing movie. And if you haven't seen it, hang your head in shame, right? And prioritize that, right, over like the immediate future.
Yeah.
that's now recorded for all time too. Right?
That's sort of what we expected, but yeah.
It's painfully obvious. Like my wife hates cartoons, hates them. She loved that movie, right? Wants to watch it again, which is weird.
Yeah. Thanks for an answer.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Hates cartoons, hates superhero movies, and loves that movie. Weird.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of superhero movies and I love it.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to love? It's just a fucking fun, great film.
Yeah.
And beautiful too. Like so well done, so well drawn. Oh,
The color palette is amazing.
yeah. The fact that they managed to stitch that thing, they have that thing hang together and make sense with that color palette is pretty
Yeah.
remarkable. Okay, guys. We'll see most of you, I imagine, next week. Some of you, let's just get into the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, who's up? Omid, I think you started the
Yeah.
ball.
Yeah. So actually go to the first page that you drew.
Sorry, what?
Can you go to the first page that you drew?
Oh, yeah.
So on bottom left, you drew a 3-point street.
Mhm.
Are we not supposed to like mix 2-point and 1-point? Because that's what I did on my assignment, and you said like,
Yeah, but there's a difference between mixing 2-point and 1-point and then confusing 2-point and 1-point, right?
Mhm.
Because what you've done, like I can do that with a street, right? Because
Mhm.
this section of the sidewalk is going there, but there's no reason that section of the sidewalk can't just turn the corner and go there at a different angle.
Okay.
Right. What you can't do is this, right? Where you start off the side of a building going there,
Mhm.
right? And then have it go here instead of going there.
Actually,
Right,
can we
'cause-
go on my assignment and you show it there?
Yeah, because imagine that you're looking straight down on top of this building. Okay. If you draw this building in 2-point, what you're looking down on is a building that has that shape. And you're looking at the corner of it there. If you do this, what you're doing, right, is changing the physical shape of that building. Right, so now you're looking at a building, that looks more something like this,
Mhm.
right, as a shape, or some sort of rhomboid. Right, at the very least, it's going to be a shape that's tapering towards its back edge. That makes sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
I mean, do you want to see it in your assignment, or?
I would like that, yeah. Because I want you to point out like all the mistakes.
Are we talking about the last assignment or the
Previous.
previous assignment? Hold on, I gotta cue everything back up here. And so I'm pretty sure I know what assignment yours is. Yeah, okay, so. Okay, so see here,
Mhm.
you're taking this here, so that implies that you're drawing a 1-point object.
Yeah.
Right? Then you're taking this here, that implies it's a 2-point object. Now that's okay for the street.
Mhm.
Right? And if it was only this, that wouldn't be problematic, but you can see here, right, that you're using this object here, you're drawing that in 2-point, but using the 1-point as the second vanishing point.
I was
Where it's-
drawing the object actually in 1-point.
Yeah, so if that object is in 1-point, that means the top of that object should be parallel
Oh,
to the horizon line. So this fence makes this fence makes sense,
okay.
right? Because it's following the street, right? Or this object here, because that can follow the street. Now, if this was a building, right,
Mhm.
then what that's going to imply is that building, right, is of a different shape. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that. My job is to basically point out that, if you're doing that, that's the effect that you're creating. And you just need to be aware of the fact that that's what you're doing. So if all of this is intentional, then I have no problem with that. Right? But if it's not, then, you know, that's a different matter. Because here, this is fine, the way that you've mixed and matched.
Mhm.
One point, because
I
this
actually
front,
felt like the metal was the problem when I saw
No.
your notes.
no, this is fine, right? Because this would be flat and those things would be going to a central vanishing point. And these ones would be at an angle because the shape of that building, right, if we looked at it from the front would be, or from the top would be something like that potentially. That makes sense?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, like the main problems was the object on the right.
Yeah, it's just that bottom right-hand corner.
That's it.
That's it, man.
But I got like 75 out of 100. I felt like there were like more stuff that I did wrong. Oh, the line quality of this one.
Okay, we've also, I don't think that that was the only comment that I gave you. Right? I also think that I mentioned that your scale.
No, the only comment was 1 point and 2 point mixing, and then for grading it was 20 for objective, 25 for creativity, 20 for line quality.
Well, that's not right. This is good. So if you ever have questions about your grades, guys, right, this is something that you should do, right? Because sometimes I get in kind of like a rinse and repeat mode with grading, right? And the grades don't accurately reflect the value of what they are. So I've just changed it. So you're an 85, right, at this point. So you've got basically five deducted from all three of those, or those last categories. And actually that's not even true because the creativity should be a 30.
Okay, so my line quality for the first one is not good, and for the second one is the 1 point object.
Yeah, your line quality is fine. Right? It's not a matter of it being bad. It's a matter of there being things that you can work on, right, with it.
What can I work on?
Where are we? Okay, so again, like the darkness of your line, the thickness of your line, darker stuff closer, lighter stuff further away, but also the volume of things. So by the volume of things, I mean, you've got a little bit of that starting to begin with the windows here. Like, what are these things here? Are these just like rectangular blocks, right, on top of the window? Right? Is this a two-dimensional sign? Does it project off at all? Does this window have any sort of depth to it? Does this door have any sort of depth, projecting or
Okay.
increasing at all? Basically, I just want to see you do more stuff like this, even at the structural stage, where you've got these ingresses and egresses of the object to create a more believable volumetric object as opposed to just a box.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and just I got one last questions. For 1 point, we cannot have curved lines because that would mean 2 point.
Sorry, for 1 point, you can't have what?
Curved lines.
How do you mean curved lines?
The first object that you showed, like the box that had like curved lines and was like going in the middle, you thought it was like 2 point?
You can have curved lines with a 1 point object. So let's say that 1 point object is a mailbox. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. One less mystery that the universe has for us to solve. Right. Who's up?
I want feedback.
Okay. From which assignment?
Third one and previous one, both of them.
Take care, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Omid. Okay. So I think with your last assignment, Aspen, I just basically deducted 5 and said, ask me
Yes.
about it. Okay, so there's some small